Let's begin our meeting. Looks like everybody's present. Full house. Okay. Turning to the agenda. Seeing no public, I assume there's no public comments for today. Items for consideration on the consent calendar. Have you reviewed the minutes?
I'd like to make a motion, if there's no corrections, to approve the minutes as written.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Abstain.
2 abstentions, 5 ayes.
And that was Jerry and...
Jerry and Phoebe, the abstentions.
And for staff, my microphone's busted,
I will share.
just in passing.
Ah,
I'll share, and we can share and cooperate.
okay, thank you. We don't have an extra right now.
Okay, moving to the draft housing element. Start with the report.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commission. Tonight, we're considering the public review of the draft housing element for the period 2015 to 2023. This is an effort that we go through every 5 to 8 years, depends on the cycle. Right now, we're on an 8-year cycle. And you have my staff report and our housing element consultant's report. What I wanted to do before turning it over to our consultant was just go over a few questions that we've had since we've issued the subject matter, and before we get into it. I wanted to acknowledge the League of Women Voters. They submitted a letter supporting our housing element, but also reiterating some concerns that they had provided in a stakeholder meeting we had a few months ago. And I just wanted to point out for the commission that these are very good comments that we appreciate, and they are by and large with regard to the administration of our affordable housing program and our ordinance itself, which is a little bit beyond the scope of what we're doing here with the housing element policies. So we are reviewing these, and we'll be considering recommendations on those to the council as we move through this process, but we're seeing this as independent from the housing element itself. And with regard to the housing element itself, there's a couple of typographical errors that I'd like to point your attention to. One's on page 28. There's a table regarding the estimated housing units.
28, you said?
Page 28. And on page 28, the estimated housing units for single family in table 1 there, the 190 should be for the above moderate. We don't have affordable housing for single family units. So that's not to say someone couldn't do it, but we don't have a requirement for it. So we're not expecting any there. And then also on the 565 multiple family units we're projecting, those are across all the income categories, and what we'll be doing is providing a little more analysis about which income categories we will be expecting these units. But what we've provided here is an aggregate. But as we move forward, we'll be providing a little more definition there. On page 73, there is a table. This is table B36, and on page 73, site 91 was an error. We were considering our public parking plazas as a potential supply of property for creating housing, but we're really just not far enough along in the city's policies regarding the use of those properties, and I think we can rely on the sites we've identified otherwise. And so we had pulled those out, and by mistake, one of those remained, and that's site number 91, so we'll be striking that. I wanted to comment a little bit on emergency shelters. The emergency shelters are for for homeless people, and we have to provide for them by state law, and we have a program, 3.2.1, in regard there. This isn't a new program, it's a carryover from our existing element, and that we need to implement. And I just wanted to point out, we didn't in our staff report that we have a multi-jurisdictional agreement where these shelters are provided in Mountain View for our residents. And then with regard to transitional and supportive housing, we've had some questions about just what those types of land uses are, or what those uses are. Transitional housing, the state has defined transitional and supportive housing as residential development, so we have to allow that type of land, that use, wherever we allow residential housing. And so transitional housing itself is rental housing for stays of at least 6 months, but where units are recirculated to another program recipient after a set period of time. And these are mainly used for homeless individuals or family transitioning to a permanent housing, and may include supportive services. And then contrasted with transitional housing or supportive housing, which has no time limit on the length of stay, and that's linked to on and off-site social services. And that's typically for low-income persons with mental disabilities, substance abuse, chronic health conditions, persons with disabilities that originated when they were minor, and so forth. And so under state law, transitional and supportive housing is considered a residential land use that, and it's only subject to those same restrictions that apply to the same type and same zone by which it's proposed. So if it's proposed in a single-family district, it has to be a single-family house. If it's proposed in a multifamily district, it has to be a multifamily unit. And so originally our ordinance, our general plan, housing element, said we're going to amend the code to define these uses and permit them in districts. And we don't believe that's really necessary under the state law. The state law recognizes those as housing, and what we're proposing is a slight change in the existing policy that would, instead of implementing an ordinance, that we would just simply recognize these types of housing units as permitted, and our general plan would provide that basis, and we wouldn't have to change our code. There's another program in Section 4, Program 4.3.2, just with regard to our affordable housing ordinance, and we've been talking about our affordable housing ordinance and some case law regarding a Palmer case, which is with regard to rental units and the city's ability or not to require developers to set aside affordable rental units. And so this is an area of housing law that's been challenged, and there is a question whether our ordinance conforms with that. So what we're going to be doing is
that on the rental or the sale?
rental only. So for sale is fine, but it's with regard to the rental. And so what we're going to do to address it in the housing element is, right now our housing element policy 4.3.2 restates our zoning code with regard to when affordable housing units are required and how many and what percentage. And so rather than be that prescriptive in the housing element itself, we will make that a more general program and then as we go through this, we'll review the existing ordinance and make sure that it's in conformance with the Palmer case law. And so if we have to make any changes to our existing code after we implement our housing element, we won't have to go back then and revise our housing element. We can just change our code if we need to. And so that's our strategy there. And then finally, I wanted to make one point that procedurally, we would like to go to the City Council with this draft first before we go to the state. And I think our report said just the opposite. So we will be sending this to Council and then sending it to the state for their review. And then if they accept it, then we'll be coming back and going through the adoption process. So with that background, I wanted to hand it over to our planning consultant, and Jennifer Gastelum of PMC has been working with us to prepare this draft, and she's got a presentation.
And before Jennifer starts, I would just add and expand on David's comments that regarding both emergency and transitional housing, it's really just an effort to acknowledge that cities can't prevent those specific types of developments, which really are conforming under the city's existing multiple family and zoning codes, because we look at development in terms of, is it multiple family, regardless of how it's necessarily used. So the point being that these projects, when they come in, if they are emergency housing type projects, which are typically proposed, not by private developers but nonprofit developers, they're going to be subject to the same height and zoning regulations as a traditional development, and the same design review processes. So they would still go through an extensive PTC, BPAC review, PTC for design, and City Council for design and use. So those development standards don't change. And then David also mentioned, but just to emphasize, that what we're trying to do at this stage is get through a draft housing plan that we can present to the City Council. And then while the document is being sent to the state, once a draft plan is endorsed by City Council, we would then move forward, which we do we've done in the last 2 cycles, and reevaluating our housing administration program, our housing administration contractors, and our zoning codes relative to affordable housing. So those are all components that we're not addressing tonight, but that would follow an acceptance of the draft plan, and those amendments would all come before the PTC and City Council as well.
James or David, I have a question.
Are we going to do questions now or after the presentation? That's kind of, I wanted to know procedurally what we were going to do.
Why don't we do the presentation and then open it?
Well, I have a question about the presentation, so I'd like to ask the question. May I do that, Madam Chair? Thank you. So could you guys briefly explain exactly what it is you expect from us? Exactly. Because the last time we had one of these, we went around in circles for quite a while, and I don't think we actually did anything. So, not a housing element, but on a different subject. So, what do you want us to do?
What we want you to do is consider these programs, policies, and goals, and recommend them to the City Council. It's not this is an update. And I think you'll hear from Jennifer that, by and large, we're maintaining the existing goals, policies, and programs that we have. There's a few cases where we're just rewording them a little bit and striking one that's out of date, adding another. Mm-hmm. So I would focus on those changes.
Okay, fair enough. Mm-hmm. That's what I needed. Thank you.
Actually, before Jennifer starts also, can you explain what the Palmer case is? Is it relevant to us?
Perhaps I could have the city attorney address that.
Funny you should ask.
Fine. The Palmer case is a 2009 decision that came out that I think we're all still sort of reeling, trying to figure out what it does. But the bottom line is, the Palmer decision determined that the requirement of a set-aside for rental in an inclusionary zoning ordinance for a certain number of units to be below market rate violated the Costa-Hawkins Act, which is the rent control statute. So we now cannot mandate a certain percentage of affordable rental units. We can still implement rental units through the density bonus statute, just like, so if they're providing so many units through density bonus, we can still require it and have them be, restricted for a certain amount of time and a certain amount of income level and all of that. But if they don't come through density bonus law and get it through density bonus or through incentives, we cannot mandate inclusionary zoning for rentals. So, and there was a bill out last year, AB 1229, that was going to be a legislative fix, and Governor Brown vetoed it. So we're where we are is where we are. And we've known, our ordinance is still on the books, but we all know that we, like many cities, we were sort of waiting to see what was going to happen. And we're still hoping that there may be a Palmer fix out there, but at this point there isn't. But Palmer does not affect for sale housing, so we can still require a set aside of affordable units until maybe the San Jose case comes out. That's another issue. But
And what is the
regardless
San
of
Jose
the San Jose case is the San Jose's ordinance that it was an inclusionary housing ordinance, and it also had in lieu fees. They lost at the trial court, they won at the appellate court, and it is now pending the California Supreme Court. And the people with their magic balls, or whatever you call those, they're saying that it's probably not going to come out good for the cities. So anyway, we're just waiting for the San Jose case. And but saying all those negative things, we still have the state density bonus law. And so when developers come in and they want density incentives, then we can still require the set-aside of units through that state law mechanism. And that would be for the for sale and also the rental. So we still have state density bonus law. So that's, I guess, the one good thing. And that applies to charter cities, general law cities, and it is, cities are so preempted by that statutory framework. If they ask for density bonus, they ask for incentives, the city shall give them to the developer. It's very flexible on reducing parking or waiving parking. State density bonus also applies if you provide a certain number of units for senior housing too. So it's the one law on the books right now that is still helping cities and counties provide for affordable housing.
So thank you for that clarification, Madam Chair. If I can just, to put it in context too, so we'll make sure that our housing plan and our codes, which I think it'll be the zoning code and the administration program, the PTC may be most interested in. A lot of what we're looking at tonight is state mandated, the numbers, the programs, et cetera. But just to put it in context, I mean, we do not get necessarily apartment projects in Los Altos. Our housing projects over the past several decades have all been condominium owner units, and almost all of them do include either density bonus or development incentives. So we do obviously have to comply with this statute in this case and make sure that our codes and policies are consistent with it, but it's not something that's going to imminently affect Los Altos. It's just something we need to be aware of.
All right.
Yeah.
Good evening. I'm Jennifer Gastelum with PMC. I'm the consultant that'll be walking you through the presentation on the housing element this evening. And I'm going to go over the purpose and some of the requirements, some of the recent housing element legislation that'll affect this update, and then some reasons for compliance, the housing element components, and the regional housing needs allocation, which kind of drives this process, and then the next steps. So the purpose of the housing element is kind of twofold. One being that it's a mechanism to identify zoning throughout the city to allow for varying densities and varying housing types, some affordable, some market rate, all of the above, basically. And its also intent is to protect the environmental resources. So we're putting housing in certain places and not disrupting other environments, and to provide a link between jobs and housing. Ooh, looks like my version of PowerPoint might be a little different, so apologies about some of the text there. The housing element is one of the 7 mandated elements of the general plan, and it is unique in the fact that we include the existing needs as well as we project out the needs, in this case for the next 8-year period. The housing element also is very unique in the fact that you're reviewing a draft, then a draft will go to the council for review, and then we will submit it off to the state for a 60-day review. At the end of that review, we will get a letter from them saying, here are things you can fix, or your housing element is conditionally, has meets all the requirements of the law, and take it forward and adopt it. And once it's adopted, then we submit it for a 90-day certification period. Typically, if we've already gone through the review process and addressed a lot of their questions or such during that 60-day review, we adopt it and send it in. It's not taking that full 90 days. I think David mentioned this, that the housing element schedule is now an 8-year schedule. Previously, housing elements were on a 5-year schedule, so this update will kick off an 8-year update timeline. It is due to be adopted by January 31st, 2015. Some of the more recent laws, and some of them we've talked about with some of the emergency shelter housing and such. SB 812 is the most recent one, and that was in 2010, and that has to do with persons with developmental disabilities and their housing needs. Basically, this is not a population group that is identified through the census. Persons with developmental disabilities, cerebral palsy, autism. The state, those are just a few examples. The state feels this is a growing population, and through the passage of this bill, we have to identify the number of persons in Los Altos that currently are receiving assistance or services for developmental disabilities, and what the number of persons as well as what programs are available throughout the region to assist with this growing population. That information is included in the document. SB 375 has to do with this update timing. Previously, the housing element was on, like I said, a 5-year update cycle. Now we're switching with the adoption of this housing element to an 8-year update cycle. This is to provide kind of a more efficient process for updating ABAG, updating the regional transportation plans. They were doing this on a more of an 8-year cycle, and then there was this couple of year gap, and then the housing element projections would come out, so everyone was on a different schedule, and it didn't ever really seem to make sense. So this is now aligning the transportation plan updates with the housing element updates, so they will all be on an 8-year update cycle. SB 2 is the emergency shelter, transitional, and supportive housing. So not to beat this one to death, but just to echo what everyone else said, this is a state law requirement to identify a zone within your community that allows for the development of an emergency shelter. It does not require the city to build an emergency shelter. It does not require the city to be involved in that process. And to date, there has not been any interest from any advocates coming in and wanting to do a shelter. Typically, shelters are in cities where they're along services and there's transportation routes. And as David mentioned, the city is currently partnering with Mountain View on programs to fund it. However, it is still a requirement to identify a zone. And, excuse me, the program in here does say there is a lengthy list of managerial requirements as well as parking, lighting, number of beds, all these things that they would have to adhere to specifically to be able to be built in the community. To date, there's not been any interest. And then transitional and supportive housing. Again, David said this, we put it in that we're acknowledging it. This is something that we're going to run by HCD to make sure that that is in compliance with their law. Typically, they want to see in your zoning code, in your land use table, that transitional and supportive housing are allowed in all zones that allow residential and adhere to those standards. So we're putting it in that we're acknowledging it. So that's kind of going to be a discussion and talking point with the state. AB 2634 has to do with extremely low-income households. There is a program in here to amend your zoning code to allow single-room occupancies with a conditional use permit. This would be like a boarding care type facility. Extremely low-income households are 30% of the area median income, so this is the population on the verge of homelessness, and so we have to identify what those needs are, as well as identify zoning for boarding care type housing. Again, with conversations with staff, no one's come in and wanted to build a boarding care type SRO type project. However, again, it's one of those state law requirements, so we need to make sure that it is allowed in the code. Lastly, AB 2511 has to do with anti-NIMBY and no net loss requirements. We set forth a very large table matrix in here of your land inventory, and it is the job of the city to either maintain the number of sites that meet your regional housing needs in here, or develop those sites and make sure that they're meeting the intent of your housing element. So, for example, you have projects that are high density or zones that allow for high density. If someone wanted to come in and build a single-family house on one of those sites that are deemed for high density, the city would potentially have to find another site to meet that requirement, so that you're not losing your high-density multifamily sites to meet your regional housing needs allocation.
And what's the acronym NIMBY stand for? Do you know?
Not in my backyard.
But why, I don't understand how this bill is.
Basically, it's, you can't arbitrarily deny a project just because, and I'm sure the attorney could further comment on it, but basically the way I understand it is that if someone wants to build a multifamily project on one of the sites in your housing element that you've identified to meet your arena, you, as planning commission staff, you can't just deny it just because you don't want it. I think, is that something kind of like that?
Yeah, especially if they're coming through on density bonus. But there's two statutes in the state planning law. There's the 65915, the density bonus, and then there's the 65895 something. It's the overarching affordable housing section, where if you're proposing a development project that provides for affordable housing, the ability for a city or a county to deny the project is very, very difficult, and it has to be supported by findings and evidence based on the record. And it doesn't mean that a city or a county couldn't deny a project, but they make the city explain the reasons why they're denying it. It's just not an outright denial. So,
Right.
yeah.
Are you talking about projects that are entirely affordable housing, or just have a component of affordable housing?
I think both, yeah. So the need for compliance. It's important that the city have an adopted housing element, and more importantly, a certified housing element to maintain local discretion over development, legal responsibility to maintain a certified adequate general plan. It also gives the city a little more opportunity to apply for different funding sources. You get more points, or you become eligible if you do have a certified housing element. And all of this is to ward off potential legal challenges. There's some cities in the Bay Area that have chosen not to do their housing elements. They have then been sued, and they have lost, and they've had to pay several $1 million, and they were building permit issues were taken away from them and stuff like that. So we wouldn't want the city to be in that position. That's why we're here. The process. So we had a housing element workshop a few months back, and we're here tonight, and then we'll go to the council to get input from both of you groups. And I know we've received several letters from different organizations, and so this is all part of gathering the information from everyone as we're reviewing the document. In addition, we take a look at all of the goals, policies, and programs from the previous housing element, and that's the big matrix at the end of the document, which reports on the progress, the implementation, and the effectiveness of each of your programs from the previous housing element. Also, the big bulk of the document is your needs assessment, which is all the demographic information. What is new to this document includes the 2010 census information. It's new to this document, which is not new anymore, but ABAG also recently released population and employment projections. All of that information is in here. And then the inventory and resources and constraints. We have the land inventory in here as well. And as David mentioned, we only did minor tweaks to the document. It was about 5 years ago or less than 5 years ago, that we drafted the previous housing element that is currently certified. And there hasn't been a lot that's changed in this time, and there hasn't been a lot of development that's occurred. So most cities were able to do, just as we're calling it, a technical update to the document to just kind of do some fine-tuning and some tweaking of programs and policies to make sure everything is current with what needs to be current right now. In addition, ABAG actually worked with the state, and they pulled all the resources. So all of the big demographic information from the census and the Department of Finance was pulled by ABAG, and it was already certified by the state. So we included all of that information in here. So when we submit this to the state, they don't have to read every single table again, because either some of them remain the same from the last housing element, or we are noting that these are from the ABAG table packet that was already approved. So it's just a little bit more of a streamlined review process. All these pieces, including the meetings and the demographic information, plays into the goals, policies, and programs. And as I said, we did fine-tuning, tweaking. As you can see, most of the programs are being continued, taking out things that are just irrelevant from the previous round. This is just another graph showing all the pieces and how everything comes together into your programs that will be implemented over the next 8-year period. The big piece that drives the housing element update process is your regional housing needs allocation. I know that there's a lot of acronyms. That's why we include a glossary of terms. Some people get lost in all these numbers. So RHNA, Southern California, they call it RHNA, but it's RHNA. HCD comes up with a goal for this next 8-year period of the number of houses that they project will be constructed. And that number then is trickled down to all the councils of governments, in this case ABAG. Their allocation was 46,680. And then through their methodology, which was like a 5 different step methodology, they broke out all of the allocations for the cities. And Los Altos' allocation is 477, which is about 100, I believe, a little over 100 more than your previous allocation, which was for a 5-year period. Now this is 477 for an 8-year period. The responsibility of the city regarding the regional housing needs allocation is to identify sites at varying densities to accommodate the RHNA. It is not the city's job to build these units. It's the city's job to set forth programs that would help incentivize these units, like your BMR and your density bonus program. We set forth these programs to help incentivize it, but it is not the city's job to build the units. It's the city's job to identify sites to accommodate it. So the way we do that is through the extremely low, very low, and low. The first top 3 categories, those about 300 units, we have to identify. The state has set forth densities that they would feel confident could produce affordable housing. So for those top 3 categories up there, almost 300 units or so, we have to identify zoning at a 20 to 30 unit and acre density. 30 unit is what they look for. We can kind of say 20 to 30. And if we identify land that can be accommodated, vacant or underutilized land at 30 units an acre, then we're meeting the intent of the law. And so we have done that, and we have a surplus of a number of sites. For moderate, we're looking at a medium dense product, and then above moderate is basically all your market rate. The city's not penalized if the units don't get built, because we have identified that there are enough sites to accommodate your RHNA for the next 8-year period. The goals remain the same. We have 8 goals. These are the same goals from the last 5-year housing element, which I believe were the same from the previous housing element. since this is my third time working on your housing element, so. Some of the revisions, just so you can highlight some of the programs, which I believe was identified in the staff report, emergency shelters. Again, identifying that this, or concurrently, as you will review the next housing element draft that will go on to adoption, staff will also be bringing forward the zoning code amendment to allow emergency shelters in your CT zone. Cities in California will not have a certified housing element from the state until that zoning is actually in place. It was a requirement to be done in 2008, so now they're holding everyone's feet to the fire until that's actually done. They're holding up certification at this point. So staff will be bringing that forward consecutively with this, or concurrently with this. Program 322, the transitional supportive housing, we talked about that one. Program 3.23 has to do with the single room occupancy. And then two new programs, 7.12 and 7.21, have to do with the CalFirst program, which is the new energy conservation and solar program, as well as additional efforts that the city's making on energy conservation. This is all stuff that's piggybacked off of the climate action plan that was adopted. So these are great programs that the city is going to be able to implement. Again, these are just the provisions where they are. These are the amendments that will be coming forward. So you'll see these. These will be zoning code amendments that you'll be reviewing, as well as the draft housing element for adoption. And that concludes my presentation. I do have a next step slide of timing. So we will be going back in October. So the September, November, as David mentioned, will more be like November, December. So all of this will be pushed back about a month or so. Excluding the January adoption hearing, we should still be able to meet that timeline.
All right, let's open it up to questions, and we're going to save comments and opinions till after we've heard from the public. So if you have specific questions to what we've just heard, now is the time.
So,
Where do you want to start?
Mike looks eager over there. Yeah.
He's at the edge of his seat.
so my question is, you mentioned that the emergency shelters will be in CT
Commercial
district,
thoroughfare.
the commercial thoroughfare district. And so just, where is that? For those of us that are not well versed in this.
The commercial thoroughfare corridor is the El Camino Real corridor. And you can look on our zoning map online, and it's that entire stretch from Adobe Creek out to the eastern boundary, or southern boundary.
And that's where the 11 acres come from. That's all the properties that are along the El Camino Real.
All the opportunity sites. Yeah, opportunity sites within that district.
Okay. Then another question I had was, so I know that Los Altos, and this was kind of the rental question, but I think that's kind of mute, which is that, is there any thought of going to existing property that is rentals to see if they would go to increase the number of, what do I want to say?
BMRs?
Yeah, BMRs. And I know that we're not talking about rentals, but kind of
Right.
just hypothetically.
We don't have the authority to require that existing projects, whether rentals or owner-occupied, be converted to affordable. But, I mean, it can happen, and it does happen, where somebody, nonprofit, purchases an existing building and converts it, or an owner may choose to provide a certain number of units for other reasons. Though, interestingly, in Los Altos, around the 1970s era, when we had more apartments, there was a push to convert those apartments, particularly in the downtown area and down here on Cuesta Tyndall area, to condominiums, so people could purchase them and renovate them as condominiums. So the city adopted a condominium conversion ordinance that if our rental rate was not above a rental availability was not above 5%, we didn't have a supply of more than 5% of our housing stock, you could not convert an apartment to a condominium, and our rental rate has never been that high. So effectively, you can no longer convert an existing apartment building to an owner condominium unit.
And then the other question I had was, I think it's table 1, where you mentioned 587 units, and what it sounds like is, this is what's potentially there. It's not necessarily what's going to happen.
Absolutely, it's an estimate.
Those are my questions.
Any other questions, Ken, John?
No, I'm good.
I've got a couple of questions. I realize that we are, in a sense, held hostage by what ABAG says we need to be doing and the targets we need to be meeting. Is there any, there was discussion a number of years ago about a two-tier system where the requirements from a small city, which is basically largely residential, largely built out, would be different in terms of the housing requirement than a city, as an example, San Jose, which has probably 50% of its land undeveloped. Has there been any change, or are we treated just like the city of San Jose in terms of requirements and ratios and things like that?
From my experience within this last RENA period, there has been more of an emphasis on transit-oriented development. So the areas where there are rapid transit and BART got the highest
Higher,
number because
okay.
they're trying to do infill. So as you get further out, there was less numbers given to communities such as yourself. I do realize that the number is 100 units more, but it is a longer period of time. It's probably not as much as it should be, but
It's a little gimme, but not a lot. Okay. And the second question is, I don't recall the last housing element update, but I'm sort of surprised to see a hit list of properties in town which are sort of, it's like putting red paint on each house saying, this is undeveloped land, and I'm just, that's to me, strikes me as kind of an odd thing. Where I don't, sort of, you're undeveloped, you watch out, somebody's going to develop you. Is that a reasonable reaction, or is this something that we've done in the past? I just.
That's what it means, John.
Oh,
That's not what it means.
I'd like staff to answer that, please.
Are you talking undeveloped or underdeveloped?
Underdeveloped properties. I mean, essentially, all the properties on the list, with the exception of the parking plazas and one or two other properties, are underdeveloped properties. Big piece of land, small house.
Our existing element has the same approach of identifying vacant and underdeveloped sites. It's one of the processes we have to go through to demonstrate to the state that we have the potential.
Okay.
And it's by parcel. Unfortunately, we have to be that specific.
Okay. It feels kind of odd, but that's okay.
Yeah, and I should add that, it is a, I think from the state's perspective, and Jennifer, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea is to identify these sites so that it makes it easier for developers to go into a community and find a property and develop them.
opportunities, I guess.
Right, yeah,
By underdeveloped, it's in relation to our zoning, basically, because if you have a single-family house in a multifamily zoning area, it's underdeveloped.
Exactly.
How else could it be underdeveloped? Because our code requires, if there's multifamily, for example, our code requires it be built to the maximum that they're allowed to
Right.
do on the site.
Right.
So in what case are we underdeveloped? I mean,
It would be the first. It would be a house on or the project wasn't built to the max, but, we're talking about old sites. Nothing recently, as you said, what your code has in place now is correct.
And I think as the commissioners understand, and as David and Jennifer explained, these are opportunity sites that show that potentially they could be redeveloped per our current zoning, and that allows us to show that we could meet the housing numbers that are established by ABAG.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a misconception to think that somehow if a property is listed, it means that somehow it's on a secret list and
Right.
sometime in the next 8 years it's going to be developed.
Right.
It's not. It's just we have an obligation to show the state that there are theoretically places where this could take place.
Right.
Not that it's going to take place or ever will take place, it's just there are theoretically places where it could.
Any other questions, Guy?
Yeah, I have questions. If you're going to give me 800 pages to read, I'm going to have questions. So I, as a part-time developer, I work with a lot of cities, and my major, and I'm also a conservative, just how realistic are these objectives to reality? I realize that these are all state mandates, but I don't see how it could possibly work. I read that, I know what the cost of land is. I know what the cost of development is. If you have a 3,500 square foot house, the permit cost is almost $60,000. So, to me, this is just a runaround. I mean, it's like the state says to the cities, you're mandated to identify these sites, but there's no way in hell that anyone's ever going to be able to do anything on it. So there's our taxpayer dollars at its normal course of action, which means it's an endless circle. So
Can I just, can you ask the specific questions that you have, and then let's leave, this is, I think, important and discussion points that we should all be able to, have, that we're going to save till after we hear from the public.
does our CT district, which has almost 11 acres of development potential, this isn't state, this isn't city land, this is private land?
Right. And I will say, and I understand your comments, you're looking at this very pragmatically, and at a high level, you look at these numbers that are being assigned to Los Altos, we just have to show that they could be met. But the realistic or the reality component of it is, over the past 10 years, 20 years, we have required that multiple family projects provide 10% minimum of affordable housing units. So all of our new projects that you see in Los Altos, they do have a component that is able to provide a certain number of housing. We have school teachers that live in those housings. We have government employees that live in those housings. We have Los Altos residents who have a high priority on the availability list. So we are providing a housing supply. It's relatively small.
But you can only do it on a multifamily development.
Yes.
And now you're saying, one of the things that you want to add to this is that if you want to make the BMR unit sort of commensurate to what the rest of the units are like.
Right, and that's been our practice, that they be mixed throughout the development, they be similar type and size, and that they not all be.
I don't think that's on there now. I think you're adding it too. No. You sure?
No, that's been in our code, and it's also per state law.
I misread it.
Yeah.
I'm glad I misread it.
They need to be dispersed throughout the project, and they need to be comparable sizes and quality, so you don't notice the difference when they're in a.
Hey, Jerry, this stuff has been going on for a long time. Chester Circle had all of that done to it. All the big multifamily places, like the thing at the Los Altos Garden Supply, it's all mandated to have BMRs.
I've developed apartments. I get it. I get it.
And as he mentioned, the garden site or whatever, a lot of those projects, you almost met your whole RENA for the last round.
I have a more of an abstract question. How do they apply to be on the BMR selection reservation list? Then B, how are they selected?
There's not a waiting list per se, but with each project that comes up, there's an advertising effort that we have, and the city has a priority category list. There's 5 different priorities where we rank the applications and then place them accordingly. And if there are people left over that are qualified and they're interested, they contact they keep in touch with our affordable housing contractor, and they get placed on an interest list, and then when another project comes up, they're notified of that so that they can apply again and
Is it
see if their
someone in the
application
city
ranks
that
higher.
selects them, or is it?
No,
Huh?
it's right now we contract with Neighborhood Housing Services Silicon Valley, and they provide those administrative services for us.
Okay.
Can add to that. There's a criteria that they have to show, so, they have to show tax stubs, income stubs,
Right,
and
right, yeah,
all
there's-
of that. So they have to
I
be
get
what
that.
is quoted as an eligible purchaser or an eligible renter. So, so there is criteria to, and it's
And
handled.
then who is it arbitrarily that selects these people?
It's not arbitrary, it's ranked, they're ranked according to their relative priority. And the council has adopted this priority list. For example, the first priority are public employees that serve the city. So it's police, firefighters, people at City Hall, municipal workers, school district employees that serve the city, and so forth. First priority. So if we get enough qualified applicants in that first priority group, the units get doled that way. But the second priority are city residents that have lived here for 2 years. Third priority are, in these generally, people that work in the community for 2 years. And fourth priority are Santa Clara County residents, and so forth. So it just kind of drills down. We typically place the units in the first, second, or third categories. There's enough interest in them that, and I'd say mostly it's the second category.
And we will be bringing the administration program back to the PTC for reevaluation, and that'll include the priority list, so we'll have all of that in front of us.
And my last question is, if you've identified 11 acres that are CT now for emergency shelter, are you saying that if I want to build an emergency shelter, would I have to get a conditional use permit? Would I have to amend the zoning? Or would I, just because it's zone CT, be allowed to do that?
Yeah, it would be a permitted use, and what we'd have to do under this program is adopt some standards for them, and then we would review it just like any other housing project in that district, and go through our development process.
Right, it would be subject to design review, just like multiple family housing is today. Multiple family housing today doesn't require a conditional use
So you'd
permit.
bypass any conditional use permit that's allowed by law?
There's a long list of all the requirements in terms of parking and lighting and number of beds that the city would establish.
Yeah, but what this says is you cannot
My point is,
deny it,
exactly, it's a
Jerry.
use by right, not by conditional.
Yeah, Jerry, you can't deny it.
Okay.
If it meets all the other requirements, then it's legal.
But it is still subject to environmental, traffic, and design review, just
Right.
like multiple family projects
Like
are
any other
today.
project, okay, I got it.
Yeah.
All right. All right, I may have other ones. I made some bookmarks, but go ahead.
Okay, a couple questions. You mentioned when we were talking about the 477, that the last time we had a number that we were trying to reach, it was about 100 less. So the last go-round, it was 100 less. And then when I'm looking at the tables of what was developed, the multifamily development, 336, and the projects that were in commercial zones, another 428, for a total of 764. So since 2005 for the commercial, 2002, so really in the last 12 years, does this mean we've actually blown through what we were required to do and doubled that in terms of it adding housing? What is that?
Yeah, I mean, we've exceeded the total number of housing units, but we have not met all of the various income categories, the affordable categories.
Okay.
And so, and it's inherent in this community, we do a lot of market rate housing.
Got it.
And so we more than meet that category, and we underperform in certain other categories.
Okay.
I wouldn't feel bad, I'm not aware of a city in the state that
63,
has.
64, 65. Okay, so I understand. So when we look at this new 477, it's not that we're so concerned with whether we can get to that number, it's whether we can get to all the divisions and the categories within it. Okay, so that kind of brings me to my next question, which is, sometimes when we see projects where density is increased and height and bulk and and mass come into play, but someone is still falling within all of the zoning requirements. An objection we get from neighbors is it's too much, right? So my question to you is should our objective as a planning and transportation commission be in these instances to encourage, even in our rural village-like town, these kind of projects that are increasing our density, because it's an objective that we're saying that we have to reach in the next 8 years. I mean, is that, are we supposed to be pushing through those types of objections?
Well, I would say that our review of multiple family projects will be the same as it has been through our last 2 housing element update cycles. We look at projects, we encourage the maximum densities that are outlined in our general plan and our zoning codes, but still, they go through design review, CEQA review, traffic impact evaluation, and they often get modified through that process. I think the point is you can't just outright say we're going to deny this project because we don't want this type of project on this site, but they're still subject to discretionary review.
And still, if the maximum density increases the amount of BMRs, so it's a win for the city.
Mm-hmm. But we have approved projects. That's a goal, but sometimes there are other factors that are considered, and a project doesn't necessarily meet maximum density, but that's a goal, and we're often very close to that.
Okay. All right. Let's open it up to public comment. Susan Russell.
Hi, I think I'm speaking for the League of Women Voters. I think you all got our letter, and unless there's any questions, I don't want to repeat that very much. I wanted to just point out a few things. I agree completely with everything the city attorney and the consultant stated. It was a good analysis of Palmer and what might be happening with condos also, and if that happens, then the BMR ordinance is basically unenforceable unless someone asks for the density bonus. And the city was really very lucky in terms of some of what you've been discussing, that the Colonnade did ask for that density bonus. Those were rentals. That's one of the largest projects that we've had in terms of getting a lot of BMR units. Whether this will happen again, a lot of other projects are not asking for density bonus, and if they don't, then the BMR program, as we said in our letter, is mainly where you're getting your affordable housing, and that's just going to be lost until Governor Brown is willing to sign some legislation, which a lot of us have been advocating for. I want to just mention again about the table on page 28, that is key, the breakdown between the various income categories, because as was just reviewed, Los Altos has done fine with getting a lot of housing built, but that's because basically we have a lot of scrapers in Los Altos, and they're all above moderate. We all know that. And we're not getting very much at all in the lower income categories, and that table and then the one on the single family that was just corrected were both misleading, but it's a requirement of the state law that be broken down, and it is important. I also want to comment again on the administrative procedures being reviewed. We put a lot in our letter on that because we have been coming, and some of you have heard this before, we've been coming for years protesting that we think the administration of the program has been not very good, and that some of the outreach and some of the other things that you all have been some of you have raised issues about whether people's names are kept on some sort of an interest list. What happens is it has not been very well done, and we would like that particular thing that was not mentioned in David's memo, but he seemed to infer it tonight. We would like that to be an important part of the review of the process. And along with that, some of you were talking about the priorities, and in the league letter, we did not write about the priorities because that was not discussed in the document or in the memo, but I wanted to point out that, for example, in the last round, and typically very few people qualify who are in the first category, which is the public employees. So it's mostly the people in the second, or sometimes it does drift down further. But typically, cities include people who live in or work in the city equally, and that's especially important in terms of the whole issue of greenhouse gas emissions, and sometimes it's even considered discrimination to not equalize them if there's public money involved. You don't have public money involved, but when there is, that's an issue. So that's why most cities do it that way. And we've brought this up before, but you have a couple of really odd things. You have persons who reside in the city at the time of application and who have lived in the city for at least the prior 2 years. And then you have persons who are handicapped persons who reside in the city at the time of application and who've lived in the city for the last 2 years, which I think is subsumed in the first category. It's people who are handicapped should not be in a second separate category. You also have households who are required to relocate their residents as a result of council action. And the city attorney can correct me, but I believe when that happens, the city has some responsibility for paying them some relocation benefits. So that should definitely be in the first priority. It doesn't ever happen in Los Altos, I don't believe, but if it did happen, you would want that to be in your first category. So these priorities really should be reworked, with the people who work in the city being given a preference, we believe, equal to those who live in the city. And I just wanted to also mention, because I think we all understand that this is something you have to comply with state law. It's a totally unrealistic list as to what will happen. These underutilized sites, there may be some of them that will be redeveloped because they are really underutilized and they're older. Most of them probably won't be redone in the next 8-year period. But if the city was really interested in doing some affordable housing, you do have opportunities here. There was a period a few years ago, I think, John, you were on the committee of the opportunity study, maybe if I'm, but there, Phoebe also, but using the public parking lots and going underground and then building office, and you could have housing up above. And if the city decided to do something like this in any of the city-owned properties, it's possible that you could have some affordable housing, because the land cost is obviously, one of the most critical costs in terms of doing affordable housing. So anyway, that's, unless someone has any questions, that's.
So I have a question for you, Sue. And you've been a familiar face.
A long time,
For League
John.
of
Yeah.
Women Voters for as long as I've been on the Planning Commission, which seems like forever.
As long as there've been-
Seems like forever to me, too, John, for me.
But I have a couple of questions, and it's really just informational. I'm trying to understand the process by which the League of Women Voters looks at these things, makes decisions, and then comes forward with recommendations. Obviously, we see you a lot. Are these your opinions? Is this? Do you do the staff work and then it's reviewed at the regional level? Is there a mandate that comes down from the National League of Women Voters in terms of policy? I don't need a long explanation, but I'm just curious as to sort of, it's League of Women Voters, but I don't really know what that means in terms of who's crafting the opinion and whose opinion it represents and what the review process is.
Okay, so on the local level, we have a fairly active Affordable Housing Committee that meets monthly, and a number of people from Los Altos are involved in that, and a number of people from Mountain View, because it's Los Altos Mountain View League of Women Voters. And so we talk about
residents.
Residents.
Okay.
Right. But over the years, the League of Women Voters, and Susan could speak to it because she's past president, but over the years, the League of Women Voters has adopted local policies in terms of what we believe in, housing and transportation policy type of things. We also have Bay Area League policies, we have Santa Clara County policies, and we have state policies, and we have federal policies. And so we work, they're called vertical positions, and we work within those positions to come up with what we think is appropriate locally. And then whenever we come up with something, it gets sent to our president, and the board gets to review it to make sure that what we're saying is in line with what our local board thinks. Right, Susan? What our local board thinks is in tune, because the league doesn't take positions on things unless they've done some study on it.
Okay.
That's why sometimes we're a slow process,
Okay.
because we have to
Thank
kind
you.
of
I was
consent.
just, it's sort of a black box, and that's a helpful.
I tend to be the most active because I think a lot of you know I used to work in affordable housing, so it's an area of expertise for me, but we have a very active committee that weighs in on this. And I'm willing to come and talk.
Thank you. Okay, let's open it up for discussion. I'm going to go left, and start with Jerry, and then go to Malka, and then work my way to the right. This way, Jerry.
Well, I agree with Ken. I know often government dictates, in this case, the state do not face the market reality test, and this is a prime example. The only affordable housing possibilities that I can think of anywhere in this state through multifamily rental and sales, land costs, construction costs, permit costs, financing, really prohibit any single-family development of low-income housing possibilities. So my whole point would be, I don't know why we're bothering so much to do over something that's no possibility. I mean, you couldn't build a house that you could possibly sell to a low-income use. You couldn't do it. So, anyway. It's a nice dance, but
Okay, I'll follow that. I think our role, at least what I see, is right or wrong. We have something in front of us which is something that the city has to adopt. I'm not an expert at this, so I don't, we are not in the legal battle, and we are not expert at this subject, so I'm not here to kind of judge one way or the other, because there are so many other things which a government would ask you to do, which just does not make sense. But I think our role here is not that. I tried to read all of it. I'll be very honest, I really did not read all the pages in detail. I focused on the numbers, and I focused on the things that were coming in front of us as changes. And I had the question about where that 11 acres was, so that got cleared off. I have similar feelings as Jerry and Ken that, this might not work, but that's just personal. I think what we have in front of us is something that we have to just look at what those changes are, and if we are okay with those changes, and push it forward to council. At least that's how I look at it. And I've been looking at the revisions. You answered most of the questions, so I think that's good. The program 7.2.1 energy efforts, those were more, I guess, because we are in that profession, I was a little bit more curious as to what it was. But as far as what's been given to us on the table, I have honestly no questions about moving it forward to. I think that's what our role is tonight. I was a little bit concerned when I thought we had to kind of look at all 28 pages or so and try to figure that out, and I really freaked out. When I looked at the revisions, I was like, okay, it kind of makes sense. So that's where I am.
Okay. Evie?
Okay, so, yes, we do this because the state makes us. On the other hand, the mission of our city, as described here, is that Los Altos is a great place to live and raise a family, and I personally believe that government protects those who are least able to protect themselves, and if it's a great place to live, everybody should have a chance to do it. With that said, we live in one of the wealthiest communities in the United States, where housing prices are insane. They're not
Number
just
two.
bad, they're just insane. But with that said, the programs that are put in place in our city, that the city is complying, that allows us to get as many BMR units as we got in the time that I have been active in the city government, is impressive for a town where the average price of a house is staggering beyond most people's dreams. With that said, I had some question. I know it's policy, so I'm bringing it up now. One of the things that Sue brought up in her letter was that we are complying with the state mandate to encourage affordable units by having second units on our lots, which are larger than some of our adjacent cities. We have a 10,000 square foot minimum. The limiting factor is not the lot size. If our code says the lot has to be 15,000 square feet, we could make it 10,000, or the council could choose to make it 10,000, because the limiting is not the size of the lot, it's the size of the parking requirement. If you have to have 4 cars parked on a 10,000 square foot lot, it's a lot of space. And that tends to be the limiting factor not only in residential, as we know, but in the multifamily. And in other commercial developments, it is all the parking that's driving this. So one of the questions is, when we're looking at potential sites, is there some feedback that we would like to give to staff and our consultant to pass on to council, that if they're serious about encouraging second units as a way of meeting our affordable housing needs, to make Los Altos available to more people, that they need to look at the parking requirements. Now, I did notice somewhere in this, I did read it all, that the city has the ability to waive that requirement if there's going to be affordable units, but there doesn't seem to be a link, particularly on second units in residential, single-family residential zones. So I think that might be something that could be tweaked. In addition, another oddball thing, so we have a limit of conversion of rentals to condominiums. We don't have a lot of rental properties to begin with, so that's fine. What about conversions from hotel to condominiums? So if a hotel doesn't work and it has the ability to be single-room occupancy because every room has its own bathroom and all you need is a kitchen in a box, if a hotel were to say not be economically feasible in our town and say, I would like to convert this all to condominium sales, how would the city deal with that?
Parking.
Well, parking is a part of it, but I'm just pointing that out as something, because if parking is going through a parking plaza, then
Hotels
the
don't have
parking
any
is...
kitchen facilities.
What I said is you can get a kitchen in a box. You can buy units. And there's something I'd like the city to think about when we're talking about protecting the lower income possibilities. There's one that hasn't been addressed at all. And I had one more. Give me just a moment.
It's not rental.
Why wouldn't you just build a shelter where you can have more people in a smaller space?
Well, what I'm saying is, if someone wants to live in a very small space, and major cities are doing them because particularly in New York and San Francisco, property values and costs are so high, you're talking a lot about the economic viability. I think across the board, we accept the fact that ours is a tough town to make affordable for anybody. So anything we can do to encourage it, I think, is good. But with that said, I can't find my third point. All I will say is our job is not to make policy. Our job is to implement policy. The people who make policy is City Council. And so if City Council wants to take on the role of being more proactive in terms of producing the opportunities for BMRs, particularly if what Jolie is saying comes to pass and our biggest tool gets lopped off, we're not going to have very many units. And so here's another way they can deal with it. They can talk the talk and walk the walk by dealing with parking and making that inclusion of the parking reduction part of the element, so it's not something that's voluntary, but it's in our code in some way. I remember the question I had, which is my third thing for staff, which had to do with the energy. Since the city has adopted, I presume, the state's Green Building and Energy Code, in our previous run-through, we had the code as it was, and then we put a bonus to make our energy standards more stringent. Did that get wiped out because the new code is more stringent, so we no longer have a bonus add on top? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we're already making it more
I knew
expensive
that.
just to meet
I knew that. Okay, thank you.
requirement.
So let me add some comments here. I think we have to be careful what we ask for, because we may get it. We've already seen where, when we have units, particularly in downtown, we have a parking issue. We fixed part of that with visitor parking. We didn't fix it with BMR units. And BMR units, in fact, don't have to meet our parking requirement. They can get away with one less parking spot. I believe that's correct. Yes, David?
In certain configurations.
In certain
State.
configuration. So while I understand, that we can change our parking requirement in residential areas, I would caution us to be very thoughtful as to the consequences. If I look what's happened on Lyell and Tyndall Streets, it doesn't read very well. It doesn't work very well for residents, for guests. I'm not saying that that would be the logical consequence of making a change, but I think we have to understand and appreciate that, and particularly areas that are close to downtown. I can tell you that, my street is now the favorite all-day parking spot for downtown workers, and there's no permit required. They can park all day. So, we have a lot of competing interests for parking. So it's not to say we do or don't do something, but be careful of the unintended consequences. When I look at this plan, I understand we have a requirement to do it. So my comments are in the context of we really don't have a choice here. And I certainly am in favor of an increased mix and affordability of housing in town. What I'm concerned about is the effect of increasing the supply, not only in Los Altos, but throughout the Bay Area. We're getting gridlock. This morning, I was trying to get to 101. I couldn't get there. It was gridlock. Going up 280 most mornings is now gridlock. Maintaining the city of Los Altos is a great place to live and raise a family. I agree with Phoebe. We need to be sensitive to the people who, are underrepresented. So, as I said, increasing the mix and affordability is a very worthwhile goal. But I'm concerned that at some point we are creating consequences in terms of density that we're not well equipped to deal with and are going to have a significant, or maybe already having a significant impact in our community.
But one boosts the other.
I'm sorry?
One boosts the other. Increased density increases the number of BMRs.
I understand that. Jerry, I'm not saying I have a solution, but I'm looking at the unintended consequences of some of the things we're doing, which is just in continuing to increase the price of housing in Los Altos because, it's getting worse. The increased density is getting worse everywhere, which is making the guy who used to commute from Sacramento and it was 2 hours, it's now 4 hours. So the price differential between Sacramento and Los Altos keeps increasing. So in a sense, we are undercutting the affordability because we are unintentionally worsening the problem. So, I think what we have here is fine, but I think we need to be aware and sensitive to, trying to figure out how we accomplish the goals that are important, but being aware of the fact that density ultimately and gridlock traffic ultimately hurts everybody.
But the good part is that the economy is doing good. That's why it's a gridlock.
The economy is doing good.
Half full.
But if it takes me half an hour to make the 10-minute trip, then think about all the lost productivity. And when you start multiplying that out, it actually winds up being a very significant number. So, we have people saying California has to grow and we need more housing units and all that, and yet the efficiency of the labor pool is actually going down because I'm spending 20 additional minutes in traffic instead of, the original 10 minutes.
I forgot to say, you did a great job, staff. No one has said this yet. I mean, we're all complaining
Made it
about
much
policy.
easier.
but in
Stealing my
fact-
I haven't.
Yeah, we haven't done
Hush
that.
up.
But I forgot to say that.
No, hush up. But you haven't gotten us yet.
There's your lead-in, Ken.
Do you have anything else to add, Phoebe? No. Okay. So you
Ken
know,
is saying something? Oh, no.
here are some thoughts.
Do the rest of us get to talk? or-
Yeah, sorry. Going right.
I guess if you're not a girl, you can't be on this committee, is that it, or what?
While we go
Hey.
to the right.
Minority.
Women.
No, I'm intentionally insulting.
You're for
So
against
I'd first like to compliment our consultant, the staff, and Susan Russell. I thought everything that was presented was really excellent. The letter from the League of Women Voters was, I just wish I could write that well. It was really well done. I don't know if you wrote that, Susan, but it was just excellent. Very, very articulate. And I thought the suggestions, in addition to the way it was written, I thought the suggestions were very well thought through. And that's also true for both what David did and I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name. I'm sorry? Jennifer, sorry. What Jennifer presented. I thought, my take on this is that I've been through about 3 of these now, and that the state and ABAG always come down, if we're squirming and unhappy, think about Atherton and Palo Alto and Menlo Park. I mean, they're real unhappy. Palo Alto, if you read the local papers, has a hissy fit every time this happens. They have thousands of units they're required to build. I think that it's really important to set the goal. I don't know that we ever necessarily hit it, but if ABAG or someone doesn't at least have a plan and tell us what they think needs to happen over the next 8 years, it'll never happen. As far as traffic is concerned, John, just be glad you don't live in Los Angeles. You have no idea what traffic is. So it may be bad here, but you aren't even close, friend.
We're getting there.
Yeah, you're not even close.
We're getting there.
You're not even close. I think that what we have is certainly something that I have no problem with supporting and sending on to City Council. I think that the suggestions that the League of Women Voters made, as James has pointed out, are probably not appropriate for what we're doing here. So I'm assuming you guys are going to deal with the administrative stuff, and Jennifer will also work on that at the appropriate time. But I thought the document as it was written is a great update on an already existing document. And it's certainly an improvement over what I remember having done in the 1990s. It's gotten quite a bit more sophisticated and it's extremely well done.
Finish?
Yep.
So I also want to echo the same comments that Ken had about that the report itself and staff and the consultants I thought was very thorough and it's very well done. I know that some of this stuff may not come to fruition, but I think that it's great that we're putting the framework together that if in case something happens, it can happen, and we all know what it's going to look like. And it would be nice that we had more affordable housing for certain populations or certain people in our community, because I do think that this community is very well off, and a lot of people are that way, and it's great, but there are also people that aren't as lucky, especially in our public employees as well as other sectors. So I thought it was great. I don't really have much comments. I was great to see the environmental pieces added. I thought it was perfect. I read through most of it, and I thought it was just outstanding. So I don't have any problem supporting it moving forward.
John, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just want to add one comment that, I would like us to get an update on a more frequent basis than every 8 years as to how we're doing in terms of, increase in number of units, increase in BMR, mix of BMR, and really understand that relative to what our goals are. Because we don't seem to do that as regular basis as I'd like. It sometimes comes up in discussion when we've got, a building that's being constructed and we're thinking of, requiring, a certain number of BMRs, a development incentives. But it would be nice once a year.
That's something that I think that's a great idea, and in the management or administrative aspect of this, James, David, you might want to consider putting in a required periodic update. So once a year, the PTC gets an update of how we're doing relative to these goals. I think that's that's a very worthwhile thing to do.
Yeah, and that is required of us to the state, and we will certainly share those with.
To the state? Oh. Yeah, so why are we not hearing that as well?
Well,
I'm not.
Okay.
I am the state. Je suis l'État.
All right, so I thought this was very interesting reading, and I was kind of disappointed that, a couple years into being on the commission, it's the
Now
sort of
yes.
first time focused on this and what our some of our loftier aspirations should be when we consider planning in the city. And I wholeheartedly endorse your suggestion that we get these updates on a yearly basis.
It's a great idea.
We obviously haven't been, because we haven't talked about this in a couple of years. But I would go even further, and I would suggest that it becomes part of the conversation at a project level, where we have an understanding of what's the density as compared to the goals or other projects, so that when we are seeing a project, we can say, this has a density level of X. And remember when we were looking at this table here, which says, you should be moving towards this, we are exceeding it, we are at it, or this would be characterized as an underutilized project. Because, when you look at just, population is growing. And as much as Los Altos would like to keep its population at 29,792, it's not happening. And it's not that, California has to grow. It just is, which means that we have more people, we have more cars, we have more traffic. The solutions aren't to say, well, let's not, accommodate that, but we have to come up with more creative solutions. So if we're going to have more traffic, then we need to come up with better public transportation and use of alternative means of transportation in our projects. And if we are complaining about parking, then we need to come up with parking solutions. It can't just be these projects can't come forward, because the population is coming, and we have to accommodate it. I think that the BMRs are lofty and unrealistic numbers. You're right. No one is building a single-family home that is below market. But I don't think that's what we.
But Ronit, that's probably not entirely true. If people like Habitat for Humanity, they build single-family homes, and they do it by buying.
Then let me be more specific. No one's doing that in Los Altos,
No one
where the
else.
cost of land is so exorbitant. So
Yeah.
I think where we are going to get those are in the higher density projects.
Yes.
Right.
So we have to look at those in a different light. And I think as we look at projects, we remember to consider, well, where does this fall in this,
What's an automatic requirement?
then I think that we will get to a better number than we would have otherwise. And when I look at the actual numbers that we got to in the last 12 years, it was 85 BMR units. And if the goal was 360, though they built 7-something, they got to, 20%. That's not terrible. It's not fair to say this is a pipe dream. It's never going to happen,
Right.
because it does, but just not at the volume or speed that we would like it to. So
We also never had such development in town as we're having now.
yeah,
So it
I
might
think
change.
this is. I wholeheartedly endorse it. I think staff did, and
Do we have to
consultant
vote on
did a great
Is it something
job.
we vote on?
So, yeah, that was my
I'd
question.
like to, stay in the loop on this.
So
Not
do
something
we
we
make a
vote
motion to approve it and to,
we recommend approval to the city council of the draft plan, and then city council.
Do I hear any motions?
so I'll make a motion to approve the,
Recommend approval. Recommend to the city council.
What he
I'm
said?
sorry, I make a motion to make a recommended approval, I'm sorry, what?
Recommend an approval to the
right.
city
You're gonna
council.
have- You're going to move to recommend approval to the city council of the draft.
There you go. I'll second
I
that.
have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes unanimously.
You know, I think we need more housing because I know city employees that have to commute here all the way from Santa Cruz, and I can't imagine someone doing that every day.
I can because they're loving it.
I think they
Depends on the car.
Okay.
live there.
Thank
Yeah, they're
you.
like,
That-
we're enjoying the view.
Do you have any reports?
That item's closed. Do we have any reports from
Second.
meetings?
Second
Anybody
was
go to the city council?
Ken,
Ken made the
and
motion and Mike.
I
Mike
seconded it.
seconded it.
And it passed unanimously.
Yeah, we switched it. 'Cause
Yeah.
He did a better job of saying it.
So Ken was the one who made the motion.
So I attended the September 8th city council meeting, and the only thing of particular interest is that they've agendized looking at what the submission requirements is for projects. So
Meaning what?
I don't know entirely. David, James, do you know what? They've agendized at the September 8th or whatever the date was, city council meeting, they agendized looking at the submission requirements for projects. But I don't,
So we get nicer pictures.
I'm assuming it means we get nicer pictures, but I'm not sure. Do you have
Yes,
any?
I'm not, I didn't attend. I think that was there.
We don't know what they're going to.
Okay, well, okay.
So we don't know.
We don't know what it means.
Well, I
So
think
that's-
the discussion was that we should, and I need to get caught up, but I think the discussion that you're referring to was we need to codify our requirements for the renderings and the content. Yeah, we've done that. And I think we shared that at the council meeting.
So we talked about that last time because the project that we went over at the last meeting was so extremely well done that
Yeah.
I made a comment to David, I think we should have that be the gold standard, that everyone should have to do
As
that.
an example that we could perhaps hand out type.
Right,
Because
exactly.
our submittal requirements ask for that.
I'm sorry?
Right.
Our submittal requirements do ask for that currently. So they just did
Yeah,
a good
but-
job at it.
Right, that
They
should be
did-
the minimum
they-
standard.
It should
Yeah.
be the minimum standard. I mean, they did a fantastic job.
Yeah.
And I think First Street would not look exactly the way it does now had they been doing those kinds of pictures.
Right, in hindsight, First Street looks
In
very
hindsight.
different than what we
Right.
saw in the drawings.
Right.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I think I mentioned, we have a rendering of Safeway on our wall in the hallway, and it looks exactly like the building that got built, so.
No,
I think we have
no,
pretty good renderings for those buildings as well. but-
Not so, because when we did the tour with the mayor, which was
Yeah.
a wonderful thing, one of the members of the public pointed out that the drawing that was in the packet was
The one in the
that
packet
was
was
submitted for
different.
permit, but in fact, it had been
All right,
amended,
that was the approved project, and an amendment came back through the process.
which was fine.
Yeah.
But I don't know what you have on the wall, but do you have it with the glass tower in the right place or not?
Well, we have
That's the
both.
question.
I'm not
Thank you,
sure who put the packet together for the tour, but we
Yeah,
have the
unfortunately-
current ones and the original ones, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, the packet had the earlier one, so
I
it was
wasn't
like,
aware of that,
all,
yeah.
the public was like, we were even a little bit taken aback, like,
Yeah,
that's a
because this
huge change.
commission and the city council did receive renderings of the modified
Correct.
building, because it had to be
Right.
approved by this
Right,
group.
right. No, well, I've seen pictures, renderings of what was built. So I don't know what you have on your wall, but I've seen renderings of what was built.
I did have a question regarding Safeway, because I thought at the bike parking at the corner of Second and State Street had more racks that they were going to put in, and there's only 2 there now. I thought there were going to be like 5. I don't know if anybody's gone back and looked,
What does that have to do with Safeway?
because it's the Safeway building.
What, Second and State?
Yeah.
We can
Oh,
check
First and
that.
State, I mean, I'm sorry, First and State, First and State. I'm off a street.
Yeah, we'll make a point of checking that tomorrow morning and email the full commission to confirm that the bike racks were put in per their approved plans.
Yeah, thank you.
Because if we want to stop traffic, we need to do more bicycles.
Yep.
And if people lived in town, they wouldn't have to commute to their jobs. Their jobs could be in town.
Exactly.
If there were jobs.
Any other potential future agenda items?
No.
No. Okay, seeing none, are adjourned.
Mazel tov.
Yes, me too.